block.one, the new co-founder of EOS. We're going to talk about EdenOS today. There's a lot of stuff going on. Dan is back in the EOS community. And obviously everyone knows Yves La Rose, the #1 block producer in the world, the recent recipient of the EOS VC grant to build a community-driven grant matching crowdfunding portal. We're talking the new governance model that Dan is presenting called EdenOS. And I think all of this stuff kind of ties together. I think this is a great episode because we've never had Dan on anything. Like, you've barely been able to interact. You were barely able to do this stuff as it was for the last couple of years. And to do it with a BP on my other side is just incredible, because I see this episode as a way to reunite everyone that's ever been in the EOS ecosystem. I hope people who haven't been paying as much attention see this, tune in, and get all caught up on all of the latest things happening, because for the first time in since around B1 June, there's more stuff going on than I can keep up with. Like, it was literally stressful to catch up on all of the conversations going on to just prepare for this. And I see this episode as a consensus building episode. So we got consensus between the block producers, the EOS community, the EOS token holders, for the architects of EOS. And I'm going to just stop talking and say, welcome, guys, and thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me on. It's really good to be able to engage and get the conversation started.
Yeah,
thank you very much. I'm excited as well. This is my first show with Dan. This is the first time that Dan and I, this is the first time live with video that we're able to speak. Dan is the reason why I'm here, and basically has shaped my life for the last 3 years. And so this is, if I could be blushing, I'd probably be blushing right now.
So one of my questions here is, I think you guys didn't have a relationship until very recently, whenever Dan kind of showed up in the EOS community with a bang. Like, you just came out of nowhere. I don't think anyone was expecting, but did you guys know each other before or talk to each other before, or is this
not too much?
No.
We spoke maybe a few times, like prior to mainnet launch and maybe after mainnet launch, but very, very little. I would say insignificant, but definitely in the last 2 or 3 weeks, there's been a lot of discussions back and forth, and for obvious reasons. So yeah.
The biggest thing is I recently got back on Telegram for the first time in a really long time, and so many people were there and just reaching out and having discussion, smoothing things over, right? Just allowing people to express what was on their mind, and I could express what I was up to. I could engage, and I could find out what's going on with the block producers. I recently joined the block producer group with all the block producers and started just trying to understand what their needs were. I think the biggest thing that I've realized is, there's a lot of rumors just circulating about the intentions of people that you have no idea who they are, that they're mysterious and so forth. And it's really easy to fall into the trap of believing without knowing, right? Just because it's repeated enough. And I fell victim of that, and I just assumed the worst. But that's because I was hearing second, third hand through the interpretations of others. But I've come to know a couple of the block producers, and I think that everyone involved really wants the best for EOS. I want the best, they want the best, and if we could just start to give each other the space to be and assume the best, I think that EOS will work out great. There's not anyone working against EOS other than our own suspicions of each other because we're not communicating.
So the theme of the show, it's something that come out of the Chinese community, Yves, the "Make EOS Great Again" meme thing. Yeah. So that's what's on the thumbnail. That's one of the themes of today's show, is how can we make EOS great again? And when we say again, that means it was great at one point. And personally, in my opinion, from the lead up to the mainnet launch all the way up until B1 June was when EOS was great. And then we had the hackathons, we had the announcement of EOS VC, we had all of the optimism in the world. And then after B1 June, Dan and Brendan, you guys both left Telegram. Honestly, I will pinpoint that as a moment where the light of the community kind of dimmed a little bit, because people just want to have an open conversation. And as like you said, like if you're not available to communicate, then you could become the boogeyman. Like even I have this conversation all the time about some of the exchanges, how a lot of people think that they're the boogeyman, but that's not always the case. And it's just because it's a miscommunication or no communication at all. So
it's projection, right? In the absence of information, your imagination runs wild. It's natural.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, and then continuing on, after B1 June, Yves, at EOS Rio, you gave a presentation that was kind of the lead up to your WPS that you're building. And it was titled to Reigniting the Magic for EOS. So you obviously saw what I saw also, where it was like the optimism and the enthusiasm and everyone just having that go-getter attitude. It slowly diminished a little bit. So this question could be for either of you guys, and we could elaborate, is like, what do you think happened that dimmed the light of the community? And then we can get into how we're planning to address and how we're currently addressing it to make EOS great again.
Well, I think a lot of it had to do with expectation of other people to do something, right? There was looking to block.one and in the absence of communication or clarity about where, roadmaps and things like that, people just had no idea where we're going, right? And there's just darkness descends on the land. Lots of people have tried to step up, but there was always, because there's looking to block.one for approval to do things, that's kind of killed things, right? Whether it's worker proposal systems that didn't go through or whatnot, and no one really knew who had authority to say what was going to happen. And there's this relationship between EOS and block.one that's has been very, very strong. And now that I'm no longer part of block.one, but I can engage directly with the EOS community, I say, hey guys, EOS is its own thing. We can make EOS whatever we as a community choose to make it, and not wait on block.one to do anything in particular. And this is actually, I can't speak for block.one, but from their perspective, right? They said EOS is a community thing, and block.one is producing the software, and there are many EOS.io chains out there. As a community, we need to take ownership of it. And so that's been what I've been coming into the community and saying, hey, I'm here. Let's take ownership of EOS as its own thing, as its own destiny, and really focus on what we can do. We've got a currency with a $4 billion market cap and tons of potential, tons of things that can be done with that. And just by looking at what we have and what we can do with it, we can make forward progress instead of looking back at what we thought we might have had or what we might have lost and what we expect other people to do. That just drains the energy out of the room. Everyone's waiting on somebody else to come save, and then people get upset when things don't happen as they would like. So my message is, hey, let's get together. Let's talk about what we can do and realize that we can provide as much or more funding for EOS directly through a small amount of inflation than block.one is providing for EOS development and EOS.io development. We have the power to have complete control over the future if we can just reach consensus, right? This is a soft kind of consensus. Who's leading the community? How are we going to allocate funds? How do we make sure things aren't being abused? And if we can have that consensus, we can move forward. And right now, the only consensus that we've had is wait on block.one. And all this, by me saying don't rely on block.one, don't expect things from block.one, nothing bad about block.one. block.one is building the core protocol. They're releasing updates to the system contract. I suspect that staking pools will be coming pretty soon. And they've recently funded a grant. And there's things that block.one is doing for the EOS community, and there's things block.one's doing for EOS.io. That's all great, but block.one is EOS.io. They're neutral to most networks, and we should be grateful for the blockchain engagement team that's reaching out to the EOS community and helping meet the needs that we might have. But if we really want to turbocharge EOS, we really want to ignite the community, we take ownership of it. And that means doing some basic things like having a website for EOS that is for the EOS community, that is the portal that you say, hey, you want to check out EOS, get involved with EOS? This is the authoritative website. And that website should be linked from all the CoinMarketCaps and similar websites, instead of discovering EOS and CoinMarketCap and then going to EOS.io, and it doesn't talk about EOS at all. It talks about EOS.io and everything. There's no instructions on how to get the network, wallets, account creation. All the questions people might have are not answered on EOS.io. And so information scattered. And so from the outside, it's just really hard to get into EOS. And so I came in and I was looking at the gaps of, what do we need to give EOS its own identity, free from block.one and the expectations of what block.one should or shouldn't do.
Oh, that's a lot to unpack. So prior to you rejoining the community to kind of lead it forward and reach a consensus, the other man on the screen here was kind of the lead. I would call you one of the top leaders of the EOS community. I'd also say that you served as the block.one Dan and Brendan punching bag for the EOS community, because you were the only one that they could release this negative energy on. And they felt helpless, and they took it out on you. They take it out on everyone, but it's really just the lack of communication. And now we have the communication. So Yves, you also, so after that talk you gave, reigniting the magic of the EOS community, a few months later, you released the initial version of your WPS. This was around like last February. So you were literally doing what Dan is saying should have happened on the mainnet, where you take the bull by the horns. We create a funding mechanism. You had a great strategy, I think, to do that. And it was ready to go forward. And then it kind of got stopped. And then I think we went through another lull because of that, because I think there was a big build up to this, and then it stopped. And then out of it came something even better. And we talked about it last night. So Yves, what has the journey been like for you? So as far as taking ownership of the network, like at what point did you, the block, not just you, but I know you're communicating with all of the other block producers. So like at what point did people figure out that they can't wait on block.one anymore and they just got to do something about it? And I guess take us along the path to now.
So obviously there's a lot to unpack in what,
there's a lot.
Dan said and then what you added to it. And I echo a lot of the sentiment that Dan was sharing, and the concepts of what he's talking about, and how that relates to what he wrote in his book. And because Dan spends a lot of time thinking about this. I think it's pretty obvious by now as well that I spend a lot of time thinking about this, and I do so more publicly than Dan was capable of doing prior to. And so, as you mentioned, we were kind of the output for a lot of this, a lot of these failed expectations, a lot of this anger, a lot of basically sadness, because a lot of people had high hopes, but some of those expectations also didn't stem necessarily inherently from those individuals, but they were pushed from other entities, other stakeholders, including block.one. But we have to remind ourselves that Dan created something that didn't exist before, and this was an experiment. And Dan is very, very upfront in saying that a lot of what he does, he not elaborates, but he implements live as it's going, right? And I think that one of the big things that changed was that prior to mainnet launch, there was a lot of back and forth and somewhat creation as we went along, and that really started slowing down. And then we started, as with anything, it's new. This got created, it's new, it's now out in the wild, and everybody has different ideas of whose role or whose responsibility it is to take care of X, Y, or Z. And then we clearly, over a period of time, see that, oh, we're actually missing this function, or we're putting this function on these individuals, but maybe they're not the best people to take care of this, but the system that we have in place doesn't necessarily facilitate the finding of those individuals for that particular function. And I think that this is what's most exciting for me. So we look at and our journey has been very, very difficult as block producers, more so specifically because we're really the only output for the West. There are no other Western block producers right now. We are the only one. And so we are essentially bearing the weight of the Western community on our shoulders. Whereas in China, from a geographical point of view, there are obviously way more people, but they're more concentrated. So it is possible when I'm in China to go from city to city to city and hit most of the EOS community in a very short period of time, in the same language, same culture, whereas it's impossible to do that in the West. How many countries would I have to go to? When I go somewhere, there's maybe 100 people in a room, whereas if I go in China, I can easily fill 10,000 people in a room. And so the concentration is very different. And that's been one of the most difficult things, is how do we kind of bridge that gap? But that really stems from the fact that a lot of the tokens and the governance system that we have in place is based on the tokens. It is an oligarchy. A lot of the tokens are concentrated in one region, and they're very dispersed in other regions. And as Dan mentioned in his book, and this goes through society as a whole, when people are dispersed and when people are disjointed and they can't communicate effectively, then it's very easy to not be able to assemble themselves and to essentially be able to coordinate. And that's the big lack, is we've seen a huge lack of a process in place for people to be able to come together, coordinate, and have that output so that people feel that they can be a part of the system. Now, clearly, people feel that they're a part of this current system that exists, but there's a predominant focus on those who have tokens, and because of Pareto, those who have a large amount of tokens. So it's very easy for a token holder who has a very minimal share of tokens to feel like they're not represented because their vote doesn't count. It's not valued. Sure, it does. It does count. I mean, you can vote on chain and it does do something, but realistically, the proportion is so small that it's very easy to feel like you can't. Now, EOS Nation has tried to do as much as possible to be that source of communication. There's only so much that we can do. So we go back to what are the people in place capable of doing, and what are their expertise? And we kind of placed everything on the block producers. And then we also placed a lot of everything on block.one. But as time goes by, we see that, well, maybe block.one is not the best suited stakeholder to do X, Y, or Z, or they're constrained and they can't do X, Y, Z. Likewise with the block producers. What I'm most excited about with having Dan back in the community, for one, Dan is able to mobilize people like no other. The gravitas that Dan has is incredible. He's the founder of this. He's the founder of multiple pieces of software prior to this. Yeah. And he just had that gravitas, right? And if somebody's going to be able to create this new entity, which I guess we call EdenOS or the function, Dan is really the best person that I can think of.
The only person.
To reach that consensus. Well, yeah, I would argue the only person.
The only person. Brock and EOS New York couldn't do it.
Is really, really important. So how this is going to be created and the output and the type of people and the kind of people that it'll be able to give voice to, in my opinion, is something that we currently don't have. We don't have that function. And it is clear after 3 years that we are missing that function. We clearly have a voice for those who have a lot of tokens. We don't have a voice for those who have a lot of skin in the game in terms of sweat equity or other variables that aren't necessarily tokens.
Yep. Let me just address some of the nature of what's gone on and what lessons have learned and how we got to where we are today. Because, you know, a lot of people, when you present a solution to them, there's like, well, why didn't you come up with that 3 years ago?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, good luck with that.
Now.
Yeah.
You know it now. Why didn't you know it then? Right? There's this kind of expectation to just have the answers. But I've been looking at, well, I saw how BitShares went, and there was lack of incentive to fund developers. There's inflation was a bad word in the BitShares community, and it's very controversial when I added it as a means of trying to find a sustainable way to have all stakeholders fund the work that's necessary to see the thing forward, right? Because there's a moral hazard of wanting somebody else to put in money and not get any return, right? That's just an unalignment and unsustainability to it. And BitShares also struggled because you're asking people to put money into something that's experimental, that's new. That's a much harder sales pitch. And so then I went on to Steem, and the idea of Steem was, well, let's recognize that people can contribute work and not just money, that they can create something like posts and content that can then be indexed by Google and drive traffic and drive adoption. And how would you bootstrap a currency and economy with no wealth, right? And that's what the idea of Steem was. And that was largely successful, except, it's trying to do massively decentralized budgeting or allocation of funds where people were voting and so forth on subjective content, right? So it was the first attempt to use network inflation to be massively distributed among a large number of people and then grow. Of course, these things are experimental, and we got to see that, Pareto principle takes over and you end up with some people that have an outsized portion of tokens, and then they play a different game of they don't care about growing the whole pie. They just care about growing their share of the pie, and they can make more profit of their share growing than trying to grow everyone's. And then there's other ego and things like that come into the mix of things. But we start to see how that created a culture that started driving people away. Even though Steem at the time was the easiest to use blockchain that your grandma could get on, and people didn't even realize they were using a blockchain. It was that easy. And there were no transaction fees, right? So I'm doing these things, and then we get to EOS, and we're going to bring all the best things of Steem and BitShares, and then add programmability so that anyone can build apps. But now we had a new challenge. How do you allocate resources for CPU, storage, and the like? How are you going to govern? How are you going to allocate tokens? So I just implemented the same consensus algorithm, but there is always this Pareto distribution of wealth in the back. EOS originally had a proposal for, I guess, a minimal worker proposal system. You identify 3 accounts that are going to get the most votes, and they're just going to get a proportion of the inflation, and then that could fund different things. Brendan and I changed our mind against that when we saw how the incentives were to siphon off the money and not invest, not use it for the good of the community, right? And so we wanted to pause that because there was a problem with delegated voting, stake-weighted voting for block producers, or for resource allocation. And so we need to put on pause. But I didn't have the answer immediately for how do we fix this. Do we go back to proof of work? Well, that's an oligarchy too. That's Pareto distributed too. That's wasting a lot of resources too. Do we go to some other proof of stake system? Pareto's dominating there, and we're seeing similar things. So what is the solution? How do we do that? And it took me a while to come up with the answer. And during that time, I could, we talk about staking pools and tweaking things here and tweaking things there. All those things are they're going around the edge. They're not getting to the heart of the problem.
I didn't get that.
Siri didn't.
You didn't understand that. You need to break it down.
All right, Siri, I'll explain it to you. Hang in there. Yeah, I needed to really think about what's the nature of cooperation and consensus building, because blockchain is, I'd say there's 2 aspects of blockchain communities. You've got the objective consensus, the real-time consensus, right? The stuff the computers are doing. And then you've got the consensus that people are doing, right? How are we going to govern the chain? When are we going to hard fork? What features are we going to add? How are we going to allocate inflation? When there's a bug, how does it get resolved? That's the subjective governance. And Bitcoin has it, Ethereum has it, every blockchain has it, right? They like to ignore that they have it and they pretend that it's all algorithms. But the algorithms only govern a limited subset of consensus, which is making sure that in real time, transactions are processed and there's agreement that this is what's valid. But so much of community building is subjective consensus and decision making. And so I got right down to, well, we start off in the jungle, right? And we're animals, and might makes right. That's the only thing that matters. And from take judgments, morality, and any of those notions that I guess are unsubstantiated. There's reasons and rationale why they exist, and I'm not saying those are bad things, but fundamentally, might makes right at the end of the day. Might is what happens. But it's not necessarily right or wrong. It's just nature. But when you think about it, two people working together are stronger than two people that are not coordinated. That's might, right? And so the mightiest are the ones that can coordinate the most people working together, and the weakest are those who can't coordinate with other people. And so there has to be some kind of consensus among any group of people so that they can move together and they can operate together and actually be stronger and survive in nature. And so I started investigating, well, what is the rationale for people to come together for consensus? Why are they doing it from a purely selfish, and we have a lot of anarchists out there that say down with the government, no government, all blockchain, right? That kind of mindset. But there's still, why would a person voluntarily submit themselves to be governed by a democracy? And if it's not a democracy, is it let the richest guy control everyone, and that's what we're going to do? Let the person who's got the best looking or the most muscles or the most computer power? All those things are kind of like arbitrary reasons for everyone to follow that person and to make them the leader. And that's what I was digging through when I was writing my book. And I had to deal with why are democracies failing? Why do we have two-party systems that don't seem to work? Why do psychopaths always seem to get in power? And the bigger the country, the more evil the leaders tend to be. And those are the questions that I had to evaluate to get from a first principles philosophy basis to answers on how we can create a better subjective governance layer for blockchains that can then hold leaders accountable, select leaders that have positive consensus building traits that aren't going to manipulate the system to get in power and then sap the wealth from everyone else who's participating. We needed the right checks and balances there. And that's what I was doing during all that time that I was quiet, because I didn't have the answers, and I didn't want to just throw half-baked ideas out there or things that I couldn't fully articulate. And that's why I put it all in the book. Writing the book was a process for me of organizing my thoughts and keeping track of all these things. And now that I've got that, I actually believe that there's a way that we can create a governance system that's inclusive for as many people as possible, that gives everyone as much power and independence as possible, and prevents capture of political parties, prevents incumbents, prevents celebrities from having an automatic sure win, right? It prevents stagnation. And all these things are what we need for a decentralized governance, a true democracy, if you will, versus a system that's governed by some oligarchy or some insiders club that just, they get in power and you can't do anything about it. They control the choke points on the community, and you have to do what they say or else. So I've been talking a while, but if you want to understand what I was doing for those years and why I wasn't, I guess, more vocal, because I didn't have all the answers on how to fix it that I thought would be sufficient. And now I think I've got I knew it's admittedly a theory, admittedly it's experimental like everything, but I think it's the best hope that we have, not just for EOS, but for the broader society, of getting a group of real non-civil attack people to come to consensus on which way we want to go and to operate together. And if we can get this group of people together, we can empower them over the EOS currency and to put that inflation to good use for the community, to grow it further. I think we can create a very powerful force in the world for the betterment and empowerment of all the members of the community. And that's the purpose of the community, is to increase the independence of its members. So that's my long-winded answer for where we've been, where we need to go, and why it wasn't necessarily obvious. And we can go into what the structure is for the audience here in a little bit. But that's why I wrote the book.
One of the I was just going to say that I'm going to let Yves comment on this, but one of the things I've seen in the community as Dan's been presenting these ideas for EdenOS or the Eden DAO is none of this matters if the block producers won't accept it. Like, what do the block producers think? So I think respond in whatever way you plan to, Yves, but please address what you've seen and heard from the block producers, since you're the one that kind of has consensus with all of them.
Sure. So I guess the first thing I wanted to say from what Dan said is, I think one of the key components that's still missing for me in how this plays out is the timing aspect of things. So time is going to be an incredibly important variable in the political playoffs, in the sense of how often does this process reoccur? And obviously, if I think you even address it, that let's say we do it 1 year, well, maybe there's incentive for people to do things at the beginning of their term, at the end of their term, and very little in between. So the stagnation, it will be essentially a reverse bell curve, depending on which point of view you look at it. So how would you address that, or what's the idea with that in terms of timing wise? I know that it was talked about 1 year, perhaps faster. In comparison with the block producers comparatively, it's an ongoing, every block essentially gets updated. How can you essentially fall upon a time variable that's quick enough not to induce stagnation, but that's long enough to actually get things done?
Sure. This also needs to be weighed against the stability of the governance, right? You don't want the president of the United States changing every time he says something that upsets half the people, right? There's that could result in chaos in policy. And in fact, in my book, I indicate that any proposal that goes forward should be proposed by the current president, and then the next president has to ratify it before it comes into the law, so that the people actually have a chance to veto or change if they don't like what it is. And the principle there is that nature is not changing. The laws that are best suited for a prosperous society don't need to be changing constantly in response to everything. And that it's like trying to fly an airplane with a high latency, right? You move the joystick, but you don't see the dials update for a couple minutes. But the plane could be in the ground by then, right? People changing policies in the government, they're yanking on the joystick left and right, and the consequences can take years or decades or sometimes centuries to play out. And so we need to have a very stable governance. Now that's once you understand what the basis is, once you have a base status quo. Now, early on, we're still experimenting right now, and so you might want to have a little bit faster updates as we learn what doesn't work and what does work. So in the long term, I think it's not going to be a problem to have a 1 year pace with a long proposal process. And that's necessary for people to evaluate what it is, the impact it's going to have them, for businesses to adapt to what's coming down the road. If I'm going to build a business on a platform, I want to know that it's not going to change overnight on me, right? That uncertainty is death to business. It's risk. It has to be priced in. So as a community, the goal of the governance should be stability. So there's that aspect of it. We've kind of jumped right ahead and assumed the audience knows what we're talking about with political playoffs and the like.
They're pretty hardcore. I would say that.
Okay.
If they're tuning in right now,
there's like a level of abstraction here with the Everything EOS audience. Like, I would just speak under the assumption that they know about the political playoffs. These are some hardcore people.
All right. I'll give just a 10-second description of what it is. You got a group of people that you want to reach consensus on. You want to make sure that it's representative of the people. You want to make sure that that it's not celebrity based. So you group them into random groups of 10 people. It could be other numbers, but we're assuming 10. And they each appoint a leader just from their group, which means each group only ever has to consider the people that are in their group. They don't have to have global knowledge. They don't have to be experts on every topic about how the blockchain works, how economics works. You just have to evaluate the people in your group. Do you like them? Do they understand your concerns? Do you trust them? Do they have reputation? And so forth. And that taps into the wisdom of the crowds because you have lots of people making independent judgments focused in their local area. And so there's more focus on more people, and every single person, if you can convince 10 people, you can get some power. And their proposal for Eden is that if you can get even elected by 10 power, you're given a budget from the inflation that you can start spending to fulfilling whatever campaign promises you made to your little group of 10 to cover your costs of just being a community member at that. And then once you have the representatives from each group, you repeat the process. You divide people into groups of 10 and so forth. And so depending on the size of the community, this might take 3 to 4 rounds. If it's 100 million people, you can do it in, I think, 7 rounds or so, 7 or 8 rounds. So it doesn't take too many rounds to select from a large group a set of leaders. And so my proposal is the EOS community come together. We use this process to select a group of leaders, right? A couple at the top, middle layer, bottom layer. And then we trickle budgets down and we give autonomy down to these groups so that we can fund the projects that the people want and that the people are interested in without everyone having to understand every project, without having to have a massive campaign audience to get attention of everyone so they can vote for what you're doing. And in that way, we can get a lot done in parallel, but still with integrity. And we have leaders and a way for information to flow down, up and down the chain. And so that's the structure of political playoffs. It's designed to select the individuals who are most effective at getting consensus in a group of 10, because you have to convince 7 out of 10 people to select you. And if you can't convince 7 out of 10, that group can't promote anyone forward. So consensus building is the skill that the playoffs are optimizing. Kind of like, if you have basketball playoffs, it's going to be the tallest, best shooting basketball players that are going to be the ones that advance. If it's chess, it's going to be the people that are best at chess that are going to advance. Here, the best consensus builders are going to be the ones that advance. And people ask, what type of person is this going to be? And my theory is that if you had someone like Marshall Rosenberg, who invented nonviolent communication as a means of having empathy and not judging people and resolving disputes between warring tribes, people with that type of personality are going to be the most likely to advance because they can hear the needs of everyone. They're not going to be judgmental, and they're going to be able to connect in a way that then allows people to reach solutions. And I think that type of personality and those types of skills are the ones that political playoffs will select for. And that's what you need for community unity as we're trying to move forward.
Yves?
Well, I can address, I agree with what Dan just said. I think that's what's going to result in happening. There are a lot of people that have been asking what would stop, for example, the same people that currently hold positions of power in EOS, arguably the block producers, from being successful in a system like that. I think it's a different skill set. So one, I don't think that they would necessarily make it that far. I don't think they'd want to make it that far regardless. Like that, I don't think that's not something that would be of interest to them, first of all. But I don't think that that's what was result. So regardless of whether or not they'd want to, I don't think that that's what's going to be the output, which is why I think it's a really good balance for that. So that really represents a different kind of person, both represent people. So both represent communities, but they are clearly, it's obvious by now that there are different communities. There are different types of people, different points of view. And at the base, ideally, I think the idea is that you start off with having a second one, there's nothing stopping from in the future having multiple of these, which represent multiple communities, multiple types of people, cultures, languages, whatever it may be, whatever that line is between, both DAOs or whatever you'd want to call them. I think that start off with one and you'd add multiple over time. And ideally, like Dan says in his book, at some point you have so many of them that they each have a voice. So everybody feels like they've got a voice in some way, shape, or form, or each voice is somewhat represented in some way, shape, or form. Whereas the current system does not really facilitate that, but it also is not designed for that. That's the big thing, is it's not designed for that. So of course that's not the output you're going to get. So just to mention that part.
Yeah, in my book, I call for democracies of democracies. You don't want 100 million people in one political playoff. You want autonomous communities, and then you have groups of autonomous communities, right? Just like in theory, we have states and a federal government. The states would each have a leader, and then they use political playoffs to select that. And the key is that it's a recursive fractal kind of governance structure that maximizes the power of the individual to have a chain reaction on the entire system. Like if you look at the cover of my book, it's one individual here who knocks over a small domino. That's their local community. And then as that local community reaches new consensus, they can knock over a bigger one. And eventually you bring down the empire, right? Or you change all of society. But it's only possible if you can reach consensus at a local level and actually affect change at the local level without dependence on having to get change at the global level first. And
so
that's
big shout out for Dan to bringing his book and just casually shilling the book in the middle of the stream. It makes me think of Linus Tech Tips when they take out, and look at this Linus Tech Tips water bottle.
I'll show.
Really
I saw
book.
it. You published an NFT for the book today, didn't you?
Yeah.
I saw it. In the...
I did. I've been accused of not having used EOS, and for a number of reasons. I guess this is something else that's worth discussing. So many of the things that I wanted to build, whether they're decentralized exchanges or social media platforms with tokens, they have all these tokens that have all these regulations and concerns around it. And so what kind of apps can you build that don't have tokens that aren't going to be considered securities and yet still benefit from blockchain? And that's and there's just so many consequences of just engaging with the blockchain, particularly if you're a high profile individual that has regulators looking at your every move. So I hadn't actually used the EOS blockchain that much, other than trying out a prediction market. But today I got in there. I created a NFT for the cover of my book, which is up for auction right now. And I did that with I guess atomic assets on EOS. So I've used EOS. It's great to see all the great tools that people are creating. I love the concept of NFTs. I think they're a little bit of a bubble right now, but it's still fascinating. It's kind of like fine art. Everything is unique and you own it for its uniqueness sake, and people are just collecting memorabilia or things that they think other people want to collect in the future because it's going to have some kind of long-term significance to it. And so it's really cool to see what people are doing there.
It's actually good timing though, because up until maybe a month or two ago, there really wasn't an NFT marketplace on EOS. And EOS Nation, did you guys kind of have something to do with some of that?
We did the first one. Well, so we have an NFT studio. You should check your messages down. We have an NFT studio. There's a lot for you to learn on how to make NFTs. Your first NFT is nice. It's missing a lot of metadata that would make it better. And we'll definitely help you. And anybody, I'm sure, will gladly help you on that. But I think it's cool. I think it was important for you to address, Dan, that because even from my point of view, it's sad to hear that you never really used EOS as the creator of the software. Because there's a lot of good out there. There's the software that you use is amazing. It's amazing.
I haven't used it, but at the same time, it's giving me an opportunity to see a lot of the rough patches. I'd like to address some of that because I think the nature of EOS, the resource model has changed recently. And when EOS was launched, it was presented as a token that represented a share of the CPU of the network. If you had 1% of the tokens, you got 1% of the network. EOS was clearly a utility token, right? Because that's what it was. But the consequence of that was if the EOS price goes up, the cost of using the network gets prohibitively expensive. It's like if you're building electronic components out of gold and the monetary value of gold goes really high, then all of a sudden your electronics are too expensive because they depend on gold. Same kind of thing was happening with EOS. With the new resource model, EOS is more of a currency, and the currency's unique market is the resources are only available in that currency. So it's kind of like the petrodollar, where oil is only available in dollars. Resources on the EOS network are only available in EOS. And that's a pivot from EOS as a resource to EOS as a currency, which is an important distinction because I think that EOS as a currency is the future direction for maximum adoption. And I think EOS makes a far, far better currency than some other networks. And it's because it's scalable, because the cost of transacting is low. It's because it's more divisible than Bitcoin or Ethereum. And that divisibility characteristic is a function of what's the smallest transaction that you can do with say a 1% fee or less, right? And it doesn't matter that you can divide Bitcoin to 8 decimal places if the smallest Bitcoin transaction you can do with a 1% fee is hundreds of dollars, right? And Ethereum, when the average transaction cost is $20. These types of things mean that unless you're transacting in big quantities, it's not divisible. In fact, gold coins are more divisible than Ethereum and Bitcoin, in that you can get 1/10 of an ounce of gold, about $200 worth. And that's something you can actually transact with without any transaction fees. You can't transact efficiently in $200 worth of Bitcoin or Ethereum. So as Bitcoin and Ethereum grow, it's going to go the same direction gold went. It's all going to flow into the banks, whether it's an exchange or some other middle layer. And the banks are going to issue IOUs for the Bitcoin, and you're going to transfer it all around. And the average person is not going to own Bitcoin or Ethereum. They're going to have claims on Bitcoin and Ethereum denominated assets in exchanges. And eventually, maybe governments will say, well, sorry, you're not allowed to control the private keys, right? They're already talking about that type of thing. And then you start getting fractional reserve, and eventually the reserve disappears, and then Bitcoin just becomes a unit of account that's printed to infinity because the people don't realize that Bitcoin, or like the dollar used to be amount of gold, that a Bitcoin used to be one of these 21 million assets. And I see that that's the direction it's going to go. And it's going to go in that direction because the base layer is not scalable enough to allow the people to transact in it directly. And if they can't transact in it directly, then it starts falling apart.
This argument is good for against Ethereum and Bitcoin, and it would have been a great argument 2 or 3 years ago. But today there's other scalable blockchains. So in your mind, like what would make EOS a better currency than something like, I don't know, like Solana or some other next gen like blockchain?
Well, let's talk about what makes a great currency. A great currency is based on the country that issues it, the country that uses it, the economy behind it. The people are what make a great currency. If we want EOS to be a great currency, we have to create a great economy where people are using the currency to buy and selling, using it as a currency. Right? NFTs bought in EOS, great. DeFi that uses EOS as collateral, great. Both of those things are using EOS as currency. They're building the independence of the community. That will add value to EOS as a currency. If the only thing that EOS is ever used for is resources on a network, and everyone else is, let's say Bitcoin, Ethereum, and whatever other token get proxied into EOS, and it's going to be like the New York Stock Exchange. They got the value of the exchange itself versus the value of the shares being traded on it. there's a really big difference. So I see the key to adoption is to focus on the economy, which means we need things like the EOS marketplace that's going on in Venezuela. And we need to have more assets for sale. We need to create auctions and eBay type interfaces that use EOS as a currency. And there's lots of tax challenges with using cryptos as currencies. But as a community, the currency use case is what's going to drive and is the only thing that justifies the value of any of these tokens.
A lot of what would need to be built will hopefully at least reach some sort of resolution with the community grant portal that we were talking about yesterday. These are all great things that they might not necessarily be profit driven to get the foundations laid. You got to build the public road system first. And right now we're kind of lacking certain things. A big recent example of this was whenever the Blancos went live for the pre-sale. You could pay with all of these other currencies. You couldn't even use your EOS to pay for a Blanco, which was an EOS IO EOS potentially based project. So that was eye opener of like how far we still need to go. And I saw you earlier.
There should be a store where I can buy EOS T-shirts and sweaters and with EOS, right? And if we're going to do things in the community, like I asked for a logo for Clarion, my new communication protocol. I paid in EOS because I wanted to use it as a currency, and I wanted people that wanted EOS and that would take EOS to be the only people that could contribute. I don't want people that are going to take credit cards or Bitcoin. I wanted to create something that was enforcing the community around EOS as an example there. And so if we do that, then that'll be amazing. There's one other thing I'd like to address that I think the EOS community needs to think long and hard about is what does it mean to create a DApp, a decentralized application, right? And this is not just EOS, the Ethereum and other smart contract platforms all have to deal with this. In my mind, the definition of a decentralized application is one that does not depend upon any single centralized counterparty. So if you need to go to a particular website to get a particular interface with a particular API in order to use your app, it might be on a blockchain. It's not a decentralized app. If there's only one provider of the API that you need, it's not a decentralized application. To be a decentralized application, it should almost be the point where you can download an Electron app to your computer. You can point it at one of 100 different API endpoints that you can then pay for the API data from. And you know that this app will continue to work without any reliance on the creator of the app or a particular service provider. And if we apply this test, we'll see that a lot of things that we consider decentralized haven't actually achieved that goal, and that the EOS community could do to create that environment so that I could write software for a new social media platform, and then people can download an app and run it, and I don't have to host any servers for it whatsoever, and it continues to function. That would be a decentralized app, one that requires my domain in order to use it, is just using a public blockchain as the infrastructure for a centralized application. And you see the same kind of problems on Ethereum, where there's interfaces for doing this DeFi product or that DeFi product. But if the website goes down, you can't use those interfaces, right? You might have your keys, you might be able to do things by hand, but in reality, for most people, they're not actually decentralized applications, because whoever's hosting those applications is taking a lot of liability, and they can be forced to censor things, delist things. I've heard of delisting of assets from decentralized marketplaces. What's that about, right? It's and so if we work together to fund the development of the API node infrastructure so that people can build and deploy apps without having to have any of their own infrastructure on their own, then we will achieve the decentralized vision, and then EOS will be a more powerful currency in that environment. And that's part of what Clarion's for, to decentralize the communication of stuff that doesn't necessarily need to be synchronized and ordered on a blockchain, but is nevertheless signed and attested and integrates into an interface. But that's where I'd like to see the EOS community address.
So you went from one thing to another, and I think they're totally different. With the EOS as a currency, and then you got into like some ideals with decentralization. I want to backtrack to the currency,
Sure.
And that's just because I know Yves has an opinion on this. Of EOS is utility. Like, what do you see as EOS? Like, what's your opinion on EOS as a currency? I'll just leave it open ended because I know we've had this discussion before. And how could we?
Is that question to me?
Yes, to you. Sorry.
Okay.
I guess you couldn't tell.
Sure if that was back at Dan. No.
No, sorry. I want to hear Yves talk. This is the longest I've ever heard you not talk.
Because I'm taking my place. I'm being very quiet, and because I can dominate conversations, so I'm purposefully remaining as quiet as possible and giving space. So so I guess concretely, I mean, there's no denying that we support the idea. We just implemented the power up model. We led the way for the power up model. We're the ones who modeled it. We're the ones who actually put the tools out so that other people can model it. We chose the parameters in partnership with the stakeholders and doing the consultation with stakeholders. And I think that that's the first step. That's the one thing that really, it is a huge transition, and it's coming to an end on April 8th, but that really is in a way the foundation. Like, that was pouring, it's even prior to pouring the concrete, it's maybe cutting the hole in the ground or whatever for this new base layer functionality that would move us towards in that direction. So obviously leading the way and doing what we did in that regard is formal. I mean, you can't debate that support, that it is what it is. The next step, I think, in that direction would be the staking pools. I strongly think that, and we can go back to the question you asked before about the inflation and about EdenOS, because I think it'll all tie back together. Mm-hmm. And going back to even prior to that, we're the ones who reduced the inflation, burnt the tokens. So there's even a lot to unpack there in that regard. For us, inflation is not taboo. For me, economic activity begets economic activity. And I think this is what's powerful about other ecosystems that we can see, like Ethereum, for example, is that we had this idea in EOS, or a lot of people had this idea in EOS with large voices, that inflation is taboo in general. And that's maybe where, because it stems from blockchain, and it stems from who created blockchain and kind of the people that it attracted at first. But inflation is not necessarily taboo. There's a way and we don't know the answer, but there's a way for economic activity to actually generate more economic activity. And ideally, for the whole to not be a zero-sum game, you need to keep attracting external economic activity as well. And this is where we're stuck right now. We're not attracting external activity, and so we're just inside within the own realm of EOS right now, recycling all of this economic activity, whereas competitors, arguably right now, the other competitor chains, are not only incentivizing economic activity within its own realm, but they're also encouraging and attracting external economic activity. I think for us to be able to start increasing the external economic activity to be ported on chain, obviously there's some foundational tools that are required, some bridges and some payment rails, and there's a lot of that kind of stuff that's required. But also, I think incentive-wise, we need to rethink the way that we currently have the incentives. The power-up model is one. The staking pools are another, where if done in a certain way, it would be an attractive feature, an attractive sell for, hey, people, you can come to EOS. You can basically bring your assets onto EOS. And there's a lot of people who, when we talk about large sums, for them, this is perhaps a small percentage of their asset portfolio, but for us, it's actually a large amount. So volume-wise, large, percentage-wise, very small for them. And all they want to do is park their assets, not touch them, not do anything, but earn that risk-free base level inflation or dividends. But then with that, that's now in the system, that's liquidity on chain that can now beget more economic activity. And that if we're able to, right now we only have 1%, let's say, to play with. And we see that 1% has been optimized. There's no doubt in my mind that the 1% as it currently exists over the last 3 years has been optimized. Regardless of whether or not you agree on how it's been optimized, it has been optimized. There's no doubt in my mind about that. Adding new inflation to the mix, one of them being, for example, EdenOS, which I support, having a set amount of inflation. And I will lobby on behalf of the other block producers, and I will lobby the other block producers to bring this change to light, because I think it's important because of what it unlocks and what it's capable of producing. I think is more valuable than the cost to it. Obviously, we won't know until we actually do it. But what is the risk of not doing it? At this point, I think far exceeds the risk of doing it. There's no doubt in my mind about that as well. And I strongly believe that based on discussions I've had with others, that they also believe the same thing. People who are in the position to be able to vote on inflation, so other block producers. So we've got the staking pools, which would be kind of the second part of transforming EOS into a usable currency. We've got this EdenOS aspect of things, which is also transforming or bringing to light, I think, another function that currently doesn't exist, which is perhaps more of the vision, the direction, maybe some marketing. It's whatever it is going to be output out of that, won't need to focus on whether or not the chain is alive tomorrow, whether or not the chain will be able to handle what they can come up with, whether or not if magically they attract 1 million users tomorrow, chain will be okay with it, whether or not the chain will continue functioning regardless of the token price. That part we've optimized. What we're missing, and where inflation come into place, is the attraction of external capital, which I think can occur with the power up model that's now in place, the staking pools, and then the attraction of the vision, the ideas, the direction, the non-tangible, more subjective things that really require a lot of sweat equity, but that isn't necessarily, it's hard to put a number on it at any given time because it's more long-term. We don't really have that. And I think that will come out of the EdenOS side of things. I think that answers kind of three different questions that you asked.
Yeah. You answer all your questions. I don't want to interrupt. Sorry.
I'm
good. That's yeah.
You guys can go.
So let's talk about what I think Eden can do. It can create an incentive to invite people into EOS, and creating the EOS evangelical promoters out there is how you grow the number of people involved, and it creates a support network for the people that are coming in, right? So that people aren't just coming in. And the reason why it would incentivize people to invite is because you're going to be assigned to a group of 10 people, and if you get elected from that group, you get a budget, right? And you can get that budget. You can do everything. You can keep it all for yourself if you like, or you can give back, right? So you can pay a small amount to participate in the governance, and then get some authority and some power and some influence. And all those things can be attractive to people who just want to go do good in the world and want other people to get on board with the impact they want to be. Come to EOS, and it's not like you've got to apply for a worker proposal and no one knows who you are and no one's going to vote for you because you're unknown. You just have to convince 7 out of 10 people that you've got a good cause that's worth funding. And I think that's be a real attractor. And the bigger the budget and the smaller the community, the more money that each one of those people will have authority over, right? And so as the community grows, obviously that budget gets divided among more people and it starts to shrink. But countering that, as the community grows, in theory, the currency is growing in value and the budget's growing with it. And that's what everyone's seeking, is to see the EOS economy, the number of people that are citizens. We want to maximize decentralization of control. I can't think of anything that maximizes decentralization more than the governance process I've laid out here, because every single Pareto distributed system is going to be controlled by the 1% having 51% of the control. Every single one, proof of work, proof of stake, delegated proof of stake. But with Eden, it truly is democratic, unlike all the other democratic systems that we have, which I call democratic in name only, or dinos. They appear to be democratic because there's voting, and it's 1 vote per person. But in practice, due to rational ignorance, due to other factors in the media and selection of the candidates and whatnot, there's other factors at play that introduce the Pareto distribution which allow incumbents to have the advantage and so many things. But with Eden, I think it's going to be the most decentralized consensus building algorithm for subjective consensus building, and that it should build unity. And that's really what we're all about with blockchain, right? We want to reach consensus, get the protocol level consensus, and then you've got the subjective governance layer consensus. And I think that could really set EOS apart and could create a movement of people that want to be part of EOS just because of the consensus mechanism. Because imagine how much better the world would be if we had truly democratic societies where people's opinions could be heard, where increase their autonomy, and so forth. I think there's a lot of appeal to be involved in that, right? Because it's not just enough to have a community that's, hey, when moon, make me money. That mindset of inviting people to a community to buy the token so that you can make money. Well, the only way you make money is by selling the token. That's not a good thing to bring people into. You want to bring people and say, hey, come buy the token. By the way, I don't want to sell. I want to be in this community and use this currency and see this change in the world. And that's something that you want to invite people to instead of begging people to buy your bags.
So I'd like to address that part because I've heard you say that on many occasions, and I agree to a certain extent. I don't fully agree. So I agree that in order to lock in the gains, you need to sell. But on paper, knowing that you own assets without selling them still brings freedom to a lot of people. So the idea that the currency that you're holding increases in value without actually locking in that value is still freedom in itself. So I'd like to make that distinction. And this is what I think is a lot of the frustration of the community, is that they're holding on to assets that they've seen decrease in value. They feel like they're a slave to the system because once they sell, they're locking in that loss. And so they don't sell. And so they're stuck in the community and all they can do is bitch about it. So we see the reverse, right? So I'm not convinced that just the token price rising means that people leave the community. Not inherently to 100%. Some will, sure. Some will perhaps also create a drip. And so they'll sell a little bit in order to be able to survive. But as the currency goes up, they don't need to sell as much. And so they're still part of the community. They still own the asset. So I don't think it's an all.
Let me rephrase that, right? You want a community that wants to be in the currency.
Of course.
They want to be a part of it no matter what the currency is doing. Obviously, they prefer that it's going up because that means the community is growing in power and in economic might, right? So the community is growing stronger as the price is going up because people want to stay in and they don't want to sell. And if that's the outcome you want, you can't focus on make the price go up because that's sending the wrong message to the people you want to attract in, right? Because people want to join something. They want to join a group of people that don't want to sell. That's when the price goes up.
The token valuation is a variable. It's not the most important variable, but it definitely is an important variable. It definitely is a tangible representation of value. And I would agree that the stronger the community, theoretically, the stronger the currency, in this case, or the token. And so it's one of the factors that I think was never really addressed, especially in the West. In the East, that is definitely more front and center in terms of discussions, even discussion being held and being able to talk about it. Whereas in the West, it was always somewhat taboo to discuss the fact that perhaps you're in here because there's financial ties linked to it. And so we saw kind of a void of never talking about it to that's the only thing people talk about. The pendulum just swung way the other way. So I think that a lot of the frustration comes from that, it's the release of 3 years not being able to talk about it while it was going down. But anyways, we're kind of going on a tangent there.
Think about what it enables. Like price does matter in a lot of ways. 2 years ago, you would see this is before the voter rewards and stuff, but there was just more capital to go around. There's more projects being invested in because whenever you're in big profits, you're able to invest to grow the system around you. And there were like a lot of more events sponsored, things like that. And that's
sure.
I'm not disagreeing that the goal is to increase the value of the community currency by producing economic activity. I'm saying that with that goal, the best way to achieve it is to focus on building a community that people want to be a
Agreed.
part of,
Yes.
building an economy that people want to be a part of. And that when you do those things, you get the result you want.
Correct.
You focus on the result in place of doing those other things, or then it kind of creates the opposite of what you want. And this applies to all areas of life. If you're working at a job and the only thing you're thinking about is your paycheck and getting a raise, that's different than saying, how am I going to produce most value for my employer, and so forth. Right? It's a mindset. It's a way of being that the paycheck-minded employees sabotage their own career advancement, whereas the passion-driven employees will naturally start have greater success. And that's not a 100% rule, but it's a general statement that the more you focus on what you don't want, the more you focus, which is the price going down, right? The more you focus on the thing you're measuring instead of the thing that causes it to grow, you're not focusing on the thing that's going to get you the results that you want. And so,
which is why it's important to now focus on where we're heading. Mm-hmm. Where are we going? Yes. That's the important.
Yeah, where are we going? Who are we going there with? And why are we doing it? I want to create a community that's maximizing the independence of the people, to be as financially independent, as socially independent, as technologically independent as possible, so that we can be as free as possible together. And that is a mission that I think a lot of people can get behind, and that will attract people, and that will produce the results you want. Sure, a lot of people can get behind the pump and dump, and a lot of people can get behind FOMO, but those don't have lasting long-term. Right? You have to sell the top, right? It's like GameStop. Everyone piles on, but this thing's going to crash, and it's just who can get out first, and most people end up hurt. But if you focus on building a community and economy, then it can go forever, and it can continue to grow, and it can provide not just economic gains, but friends, relationships, and new kinds of independence, that independence that money can't even buy. That's what the community can produce, and that's what I'm looking to invite people into. And I am so thrilled that I've gotten such a warm welcome back to the community after these 3 years, and working with the block producers and so forth. It's been really good to be back, and can't wait to see what we're going to do together.
It's been good to have you back. That's for sure. I've got a question for you, Dan. How fast, because time is an important factor, and we've lost a lot of time. How quickly do you think we can get a base functionality, base system set up, and what do you need to make that happen?
Yeah, I've been working with a team of people, not the Clarion team, but a team of people from the community that are very passionate about seeing this process implemented. And I always said that technology is meant to serve a community. The community exists prior to the technology. We can implement political playoffs without writing a single line of code, and do so in a way that is transparent and audible and verifiable. And that can be done with nothing but a Zoom meeting. Zoom already supports randomized breakout groups. And so we can vet people, we can get people in, and we can hold the very first political playoff in the next couple months, even before we get the technology, to select a leader for the first year and a set of leaders for that first year. And then the block producers can fund that without even doing any inflation. You can use the RAM fee or some of the other pools of savings that are just sitting there, but under control of block producers, to fund the development of the on-chain version of the greater political playoff process, where all the votes are on-chain and everything like that. But the community comes first. It's the people that matter, and it's the public transparency. So you record the Zoom call that demonstrates the complete transparency of who is involved, how did it happen, and then the funds go to the right people. And if that's the case, people can trust it, and we can move forward. And we're not creating a situation where what I see so often is, hey, I've got a really great idea. Let me build, spend $10 million building a prototype, and then try to get people to use it, and people don't like it. Maybe political playoffs, people don't want to be on camera, or there's some aspect of it that we don't know. I want to test it with the minimum possible technology to prove the concept, to allow the community to experience what it could be like, and then we can fund the DAO aspect of it completely on chain. But selecting some leaders in the community, getting them some funding in their hands, I think we can do in a couple of months. If the community is open and the block producers are open to an off-chain soft consensus based on political playoffs.
And then so the current idea is 0.25% of inflation after the system is live and running and then essentially implemented. How much funds or how many funds, because people are going to be asking, and obviously that's going to be my job to go lobby to get those funds. Give or take, what do you think is required to actually start this up? Have you thought about this? Is there a number in mind?
Well, there's a lot of
bring on the spot.
Right?
Feel free not to answer.
Yeah, I can't give you an actual number of what it's going to take, but I can put it in perspective.
Yeah.
That $10 million can hire 50 devs, right? And 50 reasonable devs at Western wages. And that can do a lot. 50 devs working just on this is bigger than the block.one team working just on EOS.io, right? That is a lot that can be done with just 0.25% inflation. So if the network grows, or we choose to say, hey, rather than we're funding the West with 0.25, we're funding the East with 0.25. And now we got twice as much. You can get a lot done with 50 devs. And I think we can build a prototype, a minimum system with 5 devs initially. And it's a trade-off between speed and cost. But some things just take time. And sometimes throwing more money and more devs at it is not the answer.
You also need non-devs. Part of this initiative is that you need other people that aren't necessarily coders. But that also should be compensated, or if they are compensated, the likelihood that the output will be more reliable is probably greater.
Yeah, we need community news networks like this that are producing video content, educating people. We need ambassadors that are out there moderating. We need community participants. Like if we could coordinate the community to say, hey, everyone, we're going to go do this, and people show up and they do it because that was the consensus that was reached, and that would be a very powerful group of individuals because they've bought into the fact that we're going to collaborate, they've bought into the governance model, and they're going to honor their agreement to follow the leadership and the rules that we've set up. And when they make a request, things happen. That's how we get real change in the world. And I think that this process and EOS can do it. So I'm saying that there's a lot that can be done with that budget, increasing the budget and spreading it out across more people with more autonomy, right? Trying to micromanage budgets and trying to, hold things in escrow and then have someone evaluate whether or not it's been done. It slows everything down. It's better to find a system that puts people that can be trusted. And if they waste the money, they won't get elected. And the next time we'll know that and it'll go through. The point is to generate economic activity, to allow a lot of ideas to flourish, and to do so with some accountability. And I think that that's what Eden has the potential to do. I think that we can get the first couple $1 million funded without adding any inflation. And then if we like how the experiment's going, we can adjust the inflation, we can tweak the algorithm and evolve. So that's my case.
So you said you could afford 50 good devs, but how many devs were you overseeing at block.one before you left?
I think block.one's publicly stated they have approximately 300 people between voice and EOS.io and Bullish and.
But specifically devs, how many roughly?
Oh, okay. Actual devs writing code.
Yeah. I mean, it's I guess
it depends.
Product managers.
Product managers.
I guess let me
Right?
maybe
There's
get
all
to
these
where
other
I'm
layers.
going with it.
More-
Let me just take you where I was heading with it, because I think that part's irrelevant. Is if you had 50 devs employed by EOS, how would their output be more optimized than block.one over the last few years? Because arguably, like, the main EOS IO is great, the maintenance of the software, but I think part of the discontent within the community were expectations in products being launched by block.one. And I'm assuming that there's less restrictions and limitations building out in the open, like in a with.
Well, it comes down to autonomy of the developer. Is the developer choosing the task they're working on? Are they passionate about the task they work on? Do they have the ability to publish? Do they have the ability to cooperate with people that maybe aren't getting paid to do so? The more autonomy you give people, the more productive they can be. It might be a little chaotic. There might be redundant work and so forth. When you have a big organization that's trying to create a coherent product that's managed to particular schedules and deliverables and sprints and public communication standards and documentation standards, all these things can really slow down development compared to giving one dev free reign. There's a dev, a single dev can completely build a functional prototype of voice in 3 months. One dev, 3 months, right? Steam it. 2 or 3 devs built a functional social media platform in just a couple of months. Devs can be incredibly productive if you don't have the layers and layers of bureaucracy on top. And the more professional you try to get, the more you try to get into a product pipeline that has a particular release date and regulations and all these other business concerns, those things just add overhead that slows things down. So how fast a dev can go is minimizing the number of meetings they have to attend, right? There's certain things that in corporate culture that just slow things down. And I'm not saying this is not anything bad about block.one. This is every single big company has these challenges associated with it. And I think that a community that has 10 autonomous teams of 5 is better than one community with one company with 50 employees or 50 devs. And so what I would want to do is empower the Gray Mass team, the Diffuse team, the Hyperion team, and I guess the prediction market, right? IQ and Atomic Assets and all these other DeFi projects. These have lots of teams, and if we seeded those teams with a little extra money, collectively the total output of that would be evolve much faster, but in unpredictable ways compared to, say, a centralized company that's trying to have one roadmap that forces everything into it. So I think we see
a lot of innovation in Polkadot. So Web3 Foundation gives out grants like candy, 30K grants to so many different teams. And a lot of what they're building might turn into nothing, but some of it will be great, like plugins or modules that other people could build upon. And it's working over there. Like there's people using other tools that were built through grants. And I think it would build a strong ecosystem, and this would be doing it in a more decentralized way than through like Web3 Foundation.
At block.one, we started doing some grants. At a certain point, like investing in a company requires far more due diligence and far more liability for the investor than just giving grants. You could easily spend $30,000 just doing due diligence with your legal team, right? And then there's only so much bandwidth that you can use at upper management to evaluate all the projects, and then how well can you delegate authority down to allow people to fund things without like getting abused, right? And so there's all these things that come into play, but that's one of the benefits of Eden is that we've come up with a system for basically giving grants. You're randomly assigned to a group of 10, and one person in that 10 is going to receive a grant, no matter what. That's a powerful way of vetting and distributing the funds without bottlenecking at a centralized decision maker saying what things are worth funding and what things are not. Because I don't care how smart you are, nobody knows everything that's worth funding. And so that's the power of Eden, is to get grants into as many hands as possible. And then everyone who receives a grant, they come together and they have to pick someone to receive a bigger grant, right? And so you have the best of people with ideas have to agree on who has the best idea, and so on. In that way, lots of things can happen. And which way it evolves, I don't know. I just know that the more eyes you have, the more wisdom of the crowds you can tap, the better the final result will be, and the more organic the final result will be.
So it sounds like both of these initiatives, and the Eden initiative and then the grant portal that we discussed yesterday, are on similar timelines. You're both saying a couple of months. Yves said mid Q3 potentially, and you're saying in a couple of months. So I've always found sentiment and community is the best when there's something like on the horizon to look forward to. That's why B1 June was so successful. It gave us months of, I can't wait to go to this global party. It's going to be great. And it probably created too much excitement and expectations, but that's always the best time. It's when you're the happiest. You have a vacation to look forward to in the future. And right now we have two really fruitful things on the horizon this year. How do you guys, and maybe I'll ask Yves because I think it's your turn to talk, but how do you see the grant portal and Eden coexisting, and like what would the differences be based on your understanding of Eden? Because I know you understand what you built.
Yeah, it's a really good question. We were talking about that yesterday. So because people asked right away, aren't these in direct competition? Are you guys going to be fighting? No. Why do people assume right away that this is going to be negative? Why can't both coexist? And why wouldn't both be targeting, essentially have different outputs because they're targeted in a way to different types of people or different types of projects? I see Eden, especially if we're talking about, let's say in a 1 year time lap, I see Eden more of as an ongoing funding with much larger funding than the crowdfunding platform, which will be more of a one-off funding and short-term injections. So if you were, let's take an example of Dan mentioned we need a network of API nodes all around the globe, and they need to be very, very reliable. Well, you don't want APIs that perhaps might have funding for the next 2 months and then no longer have funding after 3 months. That needs to be more of a base inflation ongoing funding. And you don't want the team to have to justify every couple of months and to go raise funds from the community to be able to do that. Completely different thing. Whereas, for example, you might have an injection for a particular, let's take EOS marketplace. For example, it might say, we need a certain amount of funds. And so we're going to go in this crowdfunding platform. We do have a big community, again, because of the quadratic formula, a quadratic funding and quadratic formula, essentially the power of more people. We need funding for a certain thing, but we're really independent. We don't need ongoing funding, but we want a cash injection. And we want to put it up to the people as to whether or not they agree. Whereas this one, Eden, you're putting it up to 9 other people, and then it is a political process. This one is more so there's a matching pool, but it's also a contribution directly from the community. It's way more short-term focused. Both of them in tandem can be incredibly powerful because now you're really plugging in different kinds of holes. So I think that both of them combined,
you could,
as you said, time-wise, incredibly powerful.
Mm-hmm. Especially coming from this,
you could see someone on Eden getting some money and then putting it into
correct.
Quadratic
yeah. So
funding.
I see people
amazing.
from Eden, in order to get, for example, up, and one of the promises that they can do, and one of the things they can do is, we're going to send the matching pool, whatever the round is, we're going to match that. That's one of the things that we're going to do. I don't see the opposite so much happening, but I do see, because the amounts just won't be enough or consistent enough because of the timelines. But I do see Eden, people saying, hey, I think the largest budget for the top is 10 million. No, what's the largest one? The 10 million in total, but the largest one is
5 million for the top, and then 500,000.
So
10,000.
of my 500,000, I'm putting 50,000 in the matching pool. I'm putting 150,000 in the matching pool. And that's one of the things that I'm doing with the funds that I receive under my purview. So I think they'll work really, really well together.
I think another thing it'll do is, so I was just going to say, like, both ideas are great. It's even greater they're happening at the same time, because for the last 3 years, there's been one income source for the entire network, and that's been the block producer inflation. And because of the last year, the way the rewards have worked, even the BPs aren't really making that much money. So it's like nobody has capital to grow the ecosystem. They're just trying to keep the lights on. And now we have something on the horizon, on the short-term horizon, that could add a lot of extra fuel that wasn't there before. And one thing that wasn't possible before is nobody could actually, like, a lot of people have other jobs or other things that they do. So maybe they could apply through the grant portal for an initial funding, and it just so happens to time up with the next political playoff, so that they're positioning themselves to be available to put in the hours and dedication to the political playoff. Because that's one of the limitations that I see, is how many people actually have the motivation to do it, the time to do it, the focus to do it, let alone the influence to be able to get through the rounds. But I think that's secondary to just getting people to show up in the first place. Because I think for this to work, you need a lot more people to show up. And then you also have to deal with the natural human thing. If you don't think you're going to win, is you're not even going to try. So you need those people to just do it just because they know it's going to help the process. Because what I don't want to see is this thing get kicked off and us find out that there's only like 100 people competing in it, and like the 3 of us end up in the same group in the first round. That would, like, that there's less risk of that happening whenever you expand the group to thousands. What other ideas are there to facilitate this with everyone's busy schedules? Like, how many people out there do we have thousands of people that could dedicate hours and hours each? How many hours do you anticipate per week, and how does it fit into people's schedules?
Well, the election can happen in a single day for most people. So for most people, you pick one day, like a weekend at a particular time, announced before the election even starts. And then there's another source of funding here. In order to participate in Eden, you have to put some money in, right? So it's not all coming from inflation, because the money gives you skin in the game. It proves that you're contributing, and that then you're going to have some say over where this money is spent. So people once they put their money in, they're going to show up, because otherwise they're wasting their money. Not only that, but they've got their reputation on the line, because if you don't show up, and if enough people in your group don't show up, your whole group is done, because you failed to reach consensus. And so there's a need to make sure that it's invite only. So as you invite people in, you only want to invite people who you believe are going to show up and do their part, and so forth. And then you can control the size of the groups. There's other things you can do to kind of manage at a smaller scale, and then grow. What we don't want to do is say, hey, everybody just come and participate, but no skin in the game. That's not what we want. We want active people that want to participate in governance, that want to have influence. And I think that there are 1,000 people that we can recruit that would be interested in this. And that would just be a starting point. And if it works, more people will show up. And I think that it's about growing organically instead of growing for growth's sake. Instead of just saying, hey, everybody come and just get a mass number of people. That's not good. You want to manage the culture and grow organically so people understand the values and understand what it is they're involved in. Because if they don't, then it's going to degrade very quickly.
Your foundations are going to be shaky, and it doesn't matter what you build them on.
I think if we can get 1,000 people, that would probably be the minimum number, just to distribute everyone in the first round. Because whenever I think of, if it was like the group that was there at B1 June, there's like a picture of everyone on stage together. And these are like the people that I would expect to want to do this. They'd have the time, the dedication to do it. And if I was in a group with any 3 or 4 of them, it'd be a really, really tough decision to make. And I guess that's a good thing, because that means the next layer is just going to be that much stronger.
But
so
the
maybe
good news is, even if you don't win, there's other people out there that will represent, I will support this person, vote for me. And if he gets voted out, then I'm going to support his cause. And that's going to be their platform. Their platform is going to be supporting you. And the thing about political playoffs, it's designed intentionally to prevent incumbents from getting an advantage. There's a chance I won't make it out of the first 10, right? I get put in a group that either randomly has people not show up, or randomly it has 3 people that really hate me for some reason. I could be out. And that's a feature, not a bug, because if that wasn't the case, then I would be the new leading political oligarchy, and it wouldn't necessarily be representative people. It'd be Dan's chain. This is about creating a system that is actually representative of the people. Now, if I got voted out, other people are going to say, hey, I really like what Dan has to say. If Dan gets voted out, I'm going to support what he's doing, and so forth. And so that creates checks and balances in the power. And that's, one of the things I mentioned in my book is we can't allow the end result not necessarily being what we would want to judge the means by which we got there. The means have to justify themselves because the means are all there is. The end is always changing, but the means are constant. So the means justify themselves. And then if we can agree to that, then we can agree to whatever outcome. I can say, yeah, I didn't win. That's fine. I can still support whoever did win. And if it really goes south and it doesn't work, then you leave the community, and that's fine. So that's the potential that Eden has, and I'm really excited that we can introduce a new level of decentralization, a new level of political decentralization that's unique in the blockchain industry. And I think uniqueness and innovation do carry a lot of weight in the cryptocurrency space. And if people see the community being positive, being well-governed, dealing with bad actors in a way that they can believe in, I think we'll see a lot of growth. I think, when we originally announced EOS, it was supposed to be the governed blockchain. And a lot of people signed up for the belief in the governance. And that governance kind of disappeared or went into the background. Eden kind of brings it back with a new light as a new way of achieving it. And I think that that's going to attract a lot of people who want to see good governance in action.
I think part of the problem with the original governance was it lacked funding initially. So like with ECAF and stuff, we had a bunch of volunteers that were responsible for doing all of this work.
Yeah.
So
it lacked funding, and it lacked consensus building, and it wasn't, people didn't believe in the process and how it came to be. So all those things conspired against it. And then there was a little bit of a sloppy execution early on. But I think that going forward with Eden, people can buy in. It actually is a process that people can believe in. They opt into it. They put their own money on the line. I think that it has potential to do a lot of good and demonstrate the power of the EOS community and create something unique in the space. I think Eden could be one of the killer apps for EOS.
And so with the first one being not really any software at all, it will take, and even with the software, it'd still take a whole lot of human coordination. Yes. Are you planning to take on that burden, or
yes,
organize? You're already organizing the team to organize the first political playoff. It's going to be a monumental task.
It's happening. It's going to happen, and I'm excited to see some just the engagement, the people working full time, voluntarily to make this happen. This is outside of the team I've hired to build apps. So this is huge, and I think there's a lot of buy-in from the community. On the eoscommunity.org website, there's something like 85% were for it, 11% said maybe they support it, and only 2 or 3% were against this general direction. I've never seen something, and this is with hundreds of votes. So there's a lot of belief in the potential of this new governance paradigm.
Yves, got any questions?
No, I was just muted because it's not you to hear noise in the background. I had a question. So when do you think you're going to propose the first Dan Larimer MSIG on EOS mainnet, Dan?
I'm working with some people about setting up a proxy. So that's one element that I'm considering getting involved in that way. But yeah, we'll see.
No timeline on when you expect to start this process then, or when you'll need the chain formally to be involved? I kind of
Okay,
have
so-
work to do to make sure that it's ready for when you do that. So I'm kind of looking for a sense of time here, if possible.
Sure. I don't want to have any. I want to build and deliver Eden before the community hands over funds. So what I proposed was that my team would build it, and then if community approves, then the funds could be allocated to it. If we wanted to if we want to do it manually, say the first round and we have multi-sig, we're going to do it offline. I haven't quite figured out how that would go since we're just starting this conversation, but I think that we could absolutely do it much faster than many people would think. The main thing is if you tell me the rest of the block producers are online and ready to support this concept, we could have a very interesting summer.
It's exciting. So I think we've covered all of the planned topics. I think now is the point where, like, Yves, if you have just random questions, or Dan, you have random questions for Yves because he could speak up for a lot of the block producers in some ways. I have a question to just clear something up for the community that it's just been confused on. You are probably one of the people that are most knowledgeable to speak to it. How would you describe the ideal relationship between the EOS public network and block.one, and what should everyone's expectations actually be, in your opinion, your personal opinion?
Yeah, the expectation between EOS and block.one should be the same as Telos and block.one, or Wax and block.one, or Werbly and block.one, or any of the other EOS.io chains in block.one. The fact that EOS is called EOS and block.one called their tokens distribution EOS, that we should separate that concept, and that's a good thing for the community, to separate EOS and the EOS project launched by community members without block.one guiding the launch. The community needs to own what they launched and created, and block.one is there to provide support and bug fixes and security updates. I know that, you know, when researchers find a security hole, they tell block.one. block.one pays bounties and coordinates with block producers behind the scenes to roll out patches to make sure that if problems are found, they're solved before anyone can exploit them. And I can see block.one continuing to be involved in that way. I can also see block.one participating in Eden or some of these other things if it was in their business interest. But we need to view block.one as block.one is not EOS. block.one's business is not EOS. They've got a large stake. They want to see EOS be successful. I know they want EOS to be successful, but they need EOS to be successful kind of on its own instead of as a dependent of block.one. So the healthiest thing the community could do is to welcome everything block.one wants to contribute, but don't have expectations that the billions of dollars are going to be used to benefit the network in any particular way. I know that block.one's working on some really cool stuff that can benefit the network, but they're just like every other company out there that's building on EOS. They happen to have a lot of money, but lots of companies integrate with EOS and have lots of money, whether it's Coinbase or various exchanges. These are all businesses with assets that are integrated with EOS. And I think that that's kind of how you have to view block.one.
Mm-hmm. So that was the other thing. So whenever we talked about making EOS great again, and when it wasn't so great for a period of time, one of the things that set expectations were some of the things mentioned at B1 June as far as deploying things to EOS, giving away free EOS accounts. Do you think that those expectations were wrong to believe that? And do you think we should hang on to like we talked today a lot about letting go of the past and moving forward and focusing on the positive? And the way to do that is to let go and realize that things may have changed due to some sort of pivot or something that we aren't aware of. Like, what should the community's expectations be based on your own knowledge of like the free EOS accounts and the deploying to anything to the mainnet and things like that? Is that past expectations?
You know, when I was there, they were still talking about it. So it's not like they've ruled it out, but there's lots of variables, whether voice or bullish end up enabling free EOS accounts is to be determined. I don't know what their plan is, and the plans can change. So I can't speak to what to expect from block.one, other than to say that the people at block.one they mean well, and they want EOS to be successful, and they're trying to figure out the best business case to make it sustainable and justifiable. Right? They're a business. They're in it to make money. It's not a charity to pump EOS bags. They need a sustainable business model that is safe with the regulators. That there's a lot of factors going on at block.one, and it doesn't help us. And, as a community, I'm viewing myself as a. It doesn't matter who you are.
You are a community member.
Right? As a community member, being disappointed about someone else not doing what you want is a waste of your energy. Right? It's a waste. It's sapping you. It's not benefiting you to, be upset or to dwell on it. And this is where practices of meditation and mindfulness, living in the present, living with the spirit of thankfulness, doing things out of active giving instead of demanding, instead of making things right and wrong. So that mindset and a community with that mindset will be far more powerful and more productive to reach the goals they want than a community that's just walking around all day saying, woe is me, when are they going to do something, being bitter about what didn't happen in the past, demanding something to happen in the future that you have no control over making, and you can't make them do anything. And so you're just wasting all this energy stewing and whatnot. That's not productive for the community. That doesn't create a community that other people want to join, right? Are you going to want to come into a community where everyone's like, man, these people, they have all this money, they're not doing what we want them to do, and gumble. People are going to leave. They're not going to sign up if that's the attitude within the community. So the more we can, even if you think that block.one should have done something, that you think that they're wrong for what they did, there's a point in time where forgiveness and forget is actually the best policy, even if you've been wronged, and even if that's what you believe is the situation. So I'm hoping that we can relate to each other and everyone in the community, whether it's block producers or block.one or exchanges that are supposedly evil and voting with users' tokens, right? All these people that we've demonized and blamed for our failures, or blamed for the reason why, we got to let go of all that, because that's just going to divide us and we're not going to get to go where we want to go. So I can't emphasize enough the importance of focusing on the positive, focusing on what we have, focusing on the great community of people that are still around. I mean, it's amazing to see how many people are here really believing in the mission. And that mission, if we focus on that, will bring us together, it will bring more people in, we'll get the growth, and we'll get to where we all want to be as a massive community making an impact in the world. So that's my take on what to expect from block.one. Don't expect anything, but don't feel sad about it either.
Well, I don't have any more questions, so we have Dan's attention. That's why I asked Yves if you have anything you wanted to get out, or if anyone in the channel has like reasonable questions, we can probably give a couple minutes.
Yeah, well, maybe there's some questions in the chat. I saw some people asking questions earlier. I need to scroll back up, but let me just scan quickly if there's anything.
Okay. This is a question I've been dying to ask. Dan, what was all the RAM for? Come on.
Free accounts.
So it's just to kind of lock in a price with the expectations of free accounts.
It's hedging the cost of RAM when we're gonna get a lot of voice users on EOS. That was the idea.
Pretty logical. That's been something I've actually wondered for a while.
My take is, we know that eventually we'll need RAM on EOS for whatever product we needed, and we might as well hedge our bets, particularly when we knew that the B1 June announcement was gonna come on, and we needed to secure resources before the resources got even more expensive, which might have hindered the business opportunity.
Mm-hmm. And I guess to just recap what we've been talking about this entire time is So up until now, basically, we've had the token holder consensus where a lot of people felt unempowered. If you don't have millions of tokens, you don't really have a say. So what is being proposed here is essentially a dual governance ecosystem, like two balances of power in a way. Is that like a fair way of describing this? Is that you have a democracy and a plutocracy with the token weight?
The power still remains the same. It's still token holders electing block producers and block producers choosing how to allocate inflation to which DAOs and the like. The power doesn't change, but it's possible that in the future the power could change if it makes sense. One of the great things about Eden, one of the things about Eden is it's now possible to create a blockchain that's decentralized with no tokens. Because you can use the Eden process to select block producers, and the block producers can operate the network, and then the network can have tokens or not have tokens, but that's just an app that happens to run on the community's network. You don't need to have any stake-weighted voting at all. It's still decentralized. So that's the real potential of what Eden could become. I'm not advocating that now. I don't want the block producers to get scared to say that's where this is going, because they have the power. They would have to yield that power and believe that was better for them in the long run. And it could be better for them in the long run, because right now the block producers are competing for votes and vote buybacks, but maybe under an Eden governance, they could have a more profitable support from without all the other games going on, right? So I'm not saying that it's going to happen. I'm not saying it won't happen, but there's potential here to have a new consensus algorithm that's above and beyond unlike anything else in the ecosystem at this time. A token-free consensus algorithm.
Interesting. I just don't want to kill the silence here, Yves.
I just have to keep muting myself because there's noise in the background. I'm not trying to engage. No, I agree with Dan. Actually, the one part I disagree is I think it actually does start the process of transferring power over ever so slightly, for sure. And I agree with that. I'm okay with that. There's no problem with that. And as we add perhaps other DAOs, so number one, let's start with one. As we add more, essentially we are. It's not the same as delegating power away. We're empowering others. It's a different, I don't look at it as the block producers losing any power. It's having processes in place so that other people can also be empowered in different ways and mechanisms so that their voice can be represented and amplified through this process, which is the political playoffs. And then they get budget. That's a big part, is they get budget out of this as well. So it's not just theoretical, there's an economic power that comes associated to that process as well. Where I think it will be interesting to see is whether or not we replicate what existed after mainnet launch. So after mainnet launch, the system that currently exists wasn't there before. It took about a year and a half for that to start happening. So for the year and a half, did we really have a system in place that was so fruitful and that encouraged development and that actually brought value to the project? Well, in a lot of metrics, that was not the case. We saw that if we just look at the token price kept going down, so that's not necessarily different. Was community sentiment better? Yes, but was it only because of that? Well, no, because there was also block.one more in the mix, and there was the hope of B1 June, that type of thing. So I'm interested to see how much optimism will come back. I think that's definitely going to be a higher return on investment. Definitely high, definitely a plus.
Are you feeling the optimism? I mean,
already.
People are saying that the optimism is like it was back in the early days, right? Yeah. There's a clear trajectory change in optimism and hope, and that's for sure. The first sign that something's going to change in the community. And I am very pleasantly surprised at how productive the block producers have been that I've talked to. So I'm more optimistic than ever. I'm glad that the community seems to be embracing the ideas, because I think it'll actually help. And this is going to be a very exciting year for EOS.
All right, so I guess we can start wrapping up unless you guys have anything else. I know.
Just want to add that yes, my power comes from my beard.
So what should the expectations be for like the short term here? And this goes for both of you guys. Like, what do you have going on? Like, Dan, maybe you could plug your Monday calls on Telegram and everything else that I guess you're working on that we could expect to see over the next couple of weeks or months.
Yeah. I'm making myself available for voice calls on Telegram, and we've had hundreds of people show up to that just to hear what's going on and to ask questions. I'd say the other thing that I could ask from everyone is please sign up at eoscommunity.org. Just signing up is a show of support, of belief, a show of numbers. The more accounts we get there, the better. And then I'm going to be posting updates and design documents and discussions on eoscommunity.org. And so that's a great way to get involved. And it's really, really powerful to have these discussions in a place that Google can search them, we can search them, and so forth. And that's free from a lot of the trolls that you would have on other social media platforms, right? When people can go to Reddit or Twitter and they already have an account and they don't have to put any effort to get involved, there's a lot more policing that is necessary. But when people put the effort to create an account and to sign up to the forums and engage on the forums, that's the real community. That's the active community. That's a sign of the number of people that might be willing to participate in something like Eden. So please sign up at eoscommunity.org, and that would be the start. And you can follow what's going on and participate in the discussions.
All right. And I can't remember if I said this before the call or during the live stream, but Dan, you're like the only person that's been able to drive the community away from Telegram. No one like the fact that you were able to bring the community together in the last just couple of weeks. You're also the only person that has been able to get people to do long form communication, which is something that's just been lacking for a long time. Like with Telegram only, you just lose so many
it's all
so
ephemeral. You have to have the same conversations over and over again, and it's hard to search. And there's lots of noise of people chiming in and posting memes and talking price and whatnot. Long form allows us to organize discussions around particular ideas that can really facilitate consensus building, whereas Telegram is better for relationship building. I think that's probably the way of thinking about it. I go to Telegram when I want to negotiate and have back and forth conversations with people. But when you want to communicate with all the people and give roadmaps and let people give insights, that's where eoscommunity.org can really shine. And so that'd be good. I've got to go here before my headset dies. So,
Yves, you want to wrap it up and just plug anything you got going on, and then we could do a little Go EOS.
Well, I just did a show yesterday, so there's very little to add. I just want to say that
you don't have more news.
We've heard the word consensus a lot today in the last 2 hours, and I just want to say that that's our focus. That's what we want to bring to the table. That's what we've brought to the table from day one, and we are in a position of power. We're in a position of power to be able to bring the other block producers in consensus with the people that Dan is working with, which he's brought in consensus. And I think that if we actually take a step back and we look at Dan's previous projects, this was one of the points in time that has occurred on 2 separate occasions in the past. And in both times, consensus was not reached. And I do strongly believe, and I'm working towards ensuring that that does not replay, that this time the community and the people with the tokens do come in consensus, move forward together to build a better system and to build a stronger, sustainable long-term growth system. And I actually see that it's going to happen. It will happen. It's just a question of time. It's happening this summer. It's happening.
I believe it too. The EOS community has been just a great community. I love all the people that I meet and engage. And so I just want to thank everyone for making EOS what it is and to continue to develop on it. And we're going to have some really exciting things that I think are going to start coming out of the community over the course of the next year. So it's a whole new network.
All right,
think that's a
amen
good
to
time
that.
to
I
do the
think that's a good
EOS.
time. All right, yeah. So
And let's do it properly today.
I got it, man. I'm all warmed up. It's been a couple
Even
weeks.
my wife told me, "How did Zack not do
late,
it?
Man.
It's his show."
It was late. Whatever. All right. So thanks for watching, guys. Until next time, I'm Zack Gall. I'm here with Yves La Rose, Dan Larimer. This is Everything EOS.
Go EOS!
EOS. Yes, go EOS. All
Smash
right.
the
Thank
thumbs
you,
up.
guys.
Hit the